The outburst, "You're selfish for not helping out," came from my dad after I declined to cover my sister's car expenses. That was the moment I truly left them behind. Just 3 days later, the bank contacted me. My life completely fell apart when I was 26 years old. Our issues had always been there, really. They resembled tiny imperfections which slowly expanded and widened over the years. It was my mom's birthday dinner that night. We were all seated around her dining table, the same one that had seen so many Sunday family meals and festive occasions. My dad, as usual, had a serious expression on his face. My sister, the perfect child, Brenda, was thriving under his gaze. And me, the black sheep of the family, even though I had a good job and lived independently. The evening followed the expected family traditions, and then Brenda dropped her bombshell. "I'm considering buying a new car," she announced while twirling spaghetti around her fork. My father readily agreed. "Something stylish, perhaps a convertible, would be good for you." He added that she deserved it. I took a sip of wine, trying to hide my annoyance with the Cabernet. Brenda, 23, had a part-time job at a shop and was living in an apartment where I was already paying half the rent, something my parents always seemed to ignore when money was being discussed. My dad looked directly at me, expecting something. "What do you think, son? You could help your sister out with this, couldn't you?" My hand stilled, wine glass midair. I set my drink down with extra care. "I already contribute to half her housing costs," I whispered. "I believe that's sufficient." The room suddenly felt freezing. "What exactly are you implying?" My dad barked, and his tone took on that aggressive quality I dreaded. "It means exactly what I stated. I'm already helping Brenda financially. I won't be purchasing her a vehicle." Brenda's expression shifted into that rehearsed display of disappointment. "I assumed you were advancing at your job. It's simply a small favor." My mouth clenched. A little favor, like that little favor I had been providing her with for years. That small bit of assistance that stopped me from getting a nicer place or taking that vacation to Rome I had saved up for. "I'm doing fine at work, but that doesn't mean I'm forced to buy you a car." My father's face turned sour. "This is how you behave towards your sister after everything we've done for you?" The classic manipulation and the oblique allusions to sacrifices. The message that I was always in debt for being raised, even though that's a parent's job, really got to me. Something inside me just broke. "Precisely what have you done for me, Dad? Please tell me, because I covered my own college bills, purchased my own car, and have been supporting myself since I was 19. His eyes widened. "You're ungrateful." "No, I am not ungrateful. I'm exhausted. Tired of being utilized as the family's financial resource while they behave like Brenda's incapable of supporting herself. Because she's superior to you," he yelled, hitting the table. "She always has been." The revelation felt heavy, like it was lingering in the atmosphere. My mom took a sharp breath. Brenda avoided my gaze, but I found myself feeling incredibly relieved. At long last, the reality I'd always suspected had been vocalized. I let out a laugh. It just came out. "Fine, if she's supposedly superior to me, then I assume she won't require my assistance any longer." I rose to my feet, the chair making a screeching sound as I pushed it back on the wooden floor. "Therefore, I won't be funding her apartment payments next month, or ever, as far as I'm concerned." My father got to his feet as well, and he gestured towards the exit. "Get out of my house," he said. "Happy to," I thought as I picked up my jacket. "Oh, by the way, Dad, perhaps you should find out who's actually been funding Brenda's living expenses for the last couple of years before you force out your personal ATM." Brenda's eyes grew wide with fear. "What do you mean by that?" I took a moment at the threshold. "It simply means I'm finished with this. You've lived in that apartment for 2 years now. I've been taking care of half your rent for the past 2 years. Dad hasn't put in a cent, regardless of what he implied to you." Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly like a fish trying to breathe. "But Dad said," Dad was lying. "I stated plainly, and now you're on your own." That evening seemed like either the end of something, or perhaps the dawn of my independence. Things can look very different depending on how you see them. The aftermath arrived quickly and was quite painful. Brenda couldn't manage to afford the rent without my financial support. She contacted me 17 times that first week. Her messages changed from irate demands to desperate, sobbing requests. Dad wouldn't intervene, despite all his big talk about family obligations. His financial standing wasn't nearly as strong as he'd tried to project to everyone. I cleaned out the joint bank account I unwisely shared with Brenda for things that were supposed to be crises, but seemed more like expensive shoes or quick trips with her pals. She used the money like it was her own personal slush fund, even though I was always putting money in every month. My dad was absolutely furious. He threatened to sell my car, which I'd bought myself when I was 19 and had finished paying for when I was 23. When I pointed out that I was the actual owner on the paperwork, he lost it, telling me I was deceitful and ruining the family. I subsequently discovered he really tried to sell it, putting it up for sale on the internet and everything. The situation got really bad when I went to my parents' house to get the car back. The neighbors were all peeking out of their windows as my dad yelled about family values, while I quietly put my stuff in the trunk. My mom was standing on the porch, twisting her hands, practically begging us to stop making such a public spectacle. They always cared about how things looked, and never about what was actually true. What I didn't understand at the time was that my dad had already set up a much more complicated scheme. 3 days after getting my car back, I got a formal-looking letter. My heart sank as I read it. It was a notice that they were repossessing my car. It didn't make any sense. I'd already paid off that car years ago, and I had the title in my name. I phoned the bank named on the notice. After being passed around from person to person, I eventually talked to someone who explained everything. Based on their files, my father had taken out a title loan using my car as collateral 6 months prior. I felt a chill course through me. I couldn't believe it, I insisted. It's mine, I owned it. He shouldn't have been able to do this. The bank employee told me they had all the documentation, and it had been signed by me. But I hadn't signed anything, so I asked for copies of the papers. After they were sent to me via email about an hour later, I just gazed at them, completely stunned. It was there, my signature, or at least something resembling it, on loan documents I'd never seen before. My dad had faked my name, used my social security number, and crafted a perfect copy of my handwriting, probably lifted from old-school papers he'd saved. I felt incredibly invaded, like my very being had been stolen. This wasn't simply financial trickery. It was full-blown identity theft, pure criminality. I felt like I was in a complete daze of shock and fury for the next 3 days. My father had been planning this for a long time, scheming to leverage my car and my assets to get his own financial benefit. All the while, he'd been asking me to help financially support his favorite kid. The bank was understanding, but they wouldn't budge. Either I paid the $7,000 loan my father had taken out, or they were going to take the car. I really didn't have many choices. I could pay off a debt I never agreed to, I could make accusations of fraud against my own dad, or I could lose my transportation. But I selected a different route. I put the car up for sale myself, paid off the bogus loan, and then used what was left over to purchase a more affordable vehicle. I had to make a lot of sacrifices to make this work, but it severed another one of the links to my father's control. When he found out what I had done, he called me completely enraged. Why would I even sell the car? Didn't I realize how much he needed that cash? Didn't I get what it would do to all of us? I just ended the call, not saying anything. His difficulties were no longer my concern, but the most hurtful thing was still to come. About a month later, after that awful meal, I found out my father had been secretly taking money out of our shared savings, which I had been putting money into since I started working at 16. He'd been using the account as collateral for loans, to pay for Brenda's shopping sprees and his own failing business ideas. My name was still on the account. The very next day, I went to the bank and took out all of the money that was left, every single dollar of it, totaling $7,853. It wasn't a huge sum, but it was legitimately mine after what he'd taken. Then I closed the account completely. My phone rang that afternoon. My father's name showed up on the screen. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" His voice was full of fury and fear. "Taking what's mine before you grab the rest," I said, my voice sounding more composed than I felt. "I needed that money," he yelled. "The bill collectors are going to be here next week." My heart was pounding, but not because I was scared, because things were so clear to me. This whole thing was never about family. It had always been about exploiting me, not my problem anymore. "You can't do this to us. We're family. Families don't steal from one another, Dad." I put the phone down, blocked his number, and Brenda's too, changed the locks on my apartment door, but it wasn't enough. 2 days after that, I walked into my apartment and saw the door was partly open. My TV was missing, along with my laptop, and the wristwatch that my grandfather had given to me. My dad had swiped my extra key from the emergency contact list that my mom had. I reported the theft to the police, filing the necessary paperwork. They managed to locate my missing electronics at a pawn shop located on the other side of the city. The pawn shop owner definitely recalled my dad, having his signature on the purchase record. I got in touch with a lawyer, secretly recorded my father confessing to the robbery over the phone, and warned him that I'd file charges unless he repaid all the money he'd ever stolen from me. He returned every single dollar, and I ended all contact with him. This choice to completely distance myself from my family wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was the result of countless evenings packing my apartment, my hands shaking as I questioned everything I'd ever believed about family and what I owed them. I'd been brought up to believe that family connections were supposed to be unbreakable, special, that you overlooked any wrongdoing by family members because family came first, no matter what. My father had consistently spouted those sayings my whole life, even while he took advantage of me and hurt me repeatedly. The clash between his words and actions was overwhelming. How could I possibly forsake the people who brought me up? What sort of individual just completely abandons their own family? On the other hand, what kind of parent steals from their own child? What sort of father falsifies documents and empties out bank accounts? What kind of parent breaks into their kid's house? The feeling of guilt stemming from leaving was constantly battling with the dread of staying involved. I scribbled down lists of reasons for and against, got in touch with a therapist I used to see, and discussed it at length with the two friends who were fully aware of everything that was happening. The pivotal moment came one night around 3 in the morning. I was wide awake, unable to sleep, my stomach churning, when a straightforward question popped into my head. Would I permit anyone else to treat me this way? The response was instant and unambiguous. Absolutely not. So why was I allowing this behavior from the very people who should have loved me more than anyone else? That newfound understanding didn't make the choice simpler, it simply made it unavoidable. I relocated to a different apartment, switched careers, and completely vanished from my family's radar. Occasionally, the only way to mend is to distance yourself from the cause of the anguish. Those initial months of cutting off contact were the most difficult. Celebrations left me feeling empty, and birthdays went by without recognition. I would automatically reach for my cell phone to text Brenda about a film she would adore or to phone my mother when I prepared one of her favorite meals. But then I'd remember they were no longer a part of my world. I would start to question if I did the right thing, if I was blowing things out of proportion, or if I should just say I was sorry and try to fix the relationship. Then, I'd recall the stealing, the dishonesty, and all the years of being controlled, and I'd put the phone down. That uncertainty would come at night, when the apartment was really still and my thoughts were too active. Was I being harsh and self-centered? What if they required my help? What if they were truly remorseful? But deep inside, I knew the same behaviors would resurface. My father would always try to control, Brenda would always take advantage, and my mother would always make excuses for them. And ultimately, I would be left feeling exhausted and used, questioning why I could never be enough. So I stood my ground, creating new ways of doing things, finding new friends who appreciated me for me, not for anything I could offer. Bit by bit, the fresh pain of being apart started to fade and felt more like a sense of calm. 6 months after that, Brenda sent me an email. She was with child, the dad had abandoned her, and she needed assistance. "We're family," she typed. "Family supports each other." I looked at those words for quite a while, my finger above the reply button. A portion of me, the side that had been molded by all the years of guilt and duty, wanted to jump in and save her. I wanted to show I was a good sibling and a good person. But another part of me, the part I was learning to pay attention to, understood the cycle. The crisis, the plea to family, the assumption that I would ignore my personal limits because she needed me. I didn't write back right away. Instead, I looked at the email, taking the time to understand how I felt. I felt sorrow for her troubles, worries about the baby, and an automatic instinct to make things better. But I also felt incredibly exhausted, realizing this pattern would continue indefinitely unless I stopped it. I just closed the email without writing back. That evening, after giving it more thought, I flagged it as junk and went on with my life. This all happened 3 years ago. My new place has a view overlooking the cityscape. My career has advanced twice. I can travel whenever I choose. No one steals my money or tries to make me feel bad for setting limits. Sometimes getting better means removing yourself. At times, it's not about repairing the damaged, but recognizing that certain foundations were flawed from the start. Last week, I ran into my mom while shopping. We locked eyes across the vegetables. She looked older, worn out. I felt a quick stab of something, not quite guilt, maybe not exactly sadness either. It was more like reminders of what our family could have been. She came over slowly, as if I might run away, and perhaps I would have once. "You look great," she said, her eyes scanning me. I agreed I am doing well. She played with her purse. "Your dad had a heart attack recently." My heart sped up. My old responses are slow to fade. "Is he okay?" "He'll be okay, but it was bad." I braced myself for the usual guilt trip, the manipulation, the thought that I would rush back, checkbook ready. It didn't happen. Rather, she mentioned that she had been reflecting on everything lately. I realized I should have intervened. "I should have shielded you." My voice caught in my throat, which took me by surprise. This wasn't the expected scenario. "You're right," I replied. "You really should have," as tears filled her eyes. "I don't anticipate that you'll forgive me or him. I simply wanted you to understand now why you left." I silently agreed, not confident enough to talk. Even after all the years apart, her simple admission still had a profound effect on me. "Brenda named her child after you," she said quietly, even after everything that happened. I concentrated on the apples in my hand, suddenly captivated by their smooth, red surfaces. "Is she still with you?" "Yes, though she's trying," she replied. "She's working a full-time job currently and taking evening classes." I didn't experience any emotion other than a detached feeling of sympathy. Good for her. My mom appeared like she was about to say more, but she stopped herself. Instead, she reached toward me, paused, and then gently touched my arm. "I'm proud of you," she murmured. I should have spoken those words more. The words seemed to surround me like autumn leaves, too late to make a difference, but somehow still important. "Thanks," I replied, and I truly meant it. We didn't trade phone numbers, and we made no plans to get together again. Some relationships that end are just gone. However, as I saw her walking away, I felt a change inside of me. It wasn't exactly forgiveness. I wasn't prepared for that. I might not ever truly comprehend everything, but maybe some degree of awareness. A realization that we were all flawed individuals, acting out behaviors that were ingrained long before we had any control. Actually, the decision to cut ties wasn't a spontaneous reaction born of anger. It was a long process, with countless small decisions made every day for ages. It was the decision not to phone when I was feeling alone, not to get in touch during special occasions, not to reply to the rare messages that would come to me through people we both knew. Each one of those choices brought with it a wave of sorrow, self-doubt, and a personal struggle between what I'd been trained to believe was important and what I required in order to feel okay. I'd question myself during those times, wondering if severing all contact had been too severe, if there could have been a compromise, some sort of cautious space instead of complete estrangement. But then, I'd recall the violation of having my identity stolen, the terrible hurt of finding my home had been invaded, the years of being appreciated only for what I could give, never for who I was. And I'd understand, with a conviction that went right to my core, that going no contact was the only way I could mend. He just couldn't comprehend how the stress he put me under had actually made me more resilient, similar to the way intense heat transforms coal into a diamond, a process born from his disapproval. The family that truly matters is the one you select, the one you create, the one that acknowledges your value without needing constant validation. I discovered this type of family in surprising locations, like friends who offer support without hesitation and coworkers who appreciate my work. Even my own presence has become a comfort, and I appreciate it more than I used to. Some folks claim family bonds are the strongest, but I've come to believe that valuing myself is more important than either. If you're stuck in a family situation that depletes your energy rather than supporting you, I can tell you there's something better waiting. Things may not wrap up perfectly as we're led to believe. You probably won't get hugs and apologies, but you will get serenity. You'll get mornings where you don't wake up worried about the phone ringing, plus holidays that are exactly how you want them. You'll also get to understand that your worth was never up to those who couldn't grasp it. Sometimes the most caring course of action for yourself and for others involves removing yourself and letting the situation resolve itself. Sometimes I still hope we could fix things, that our family could be normal again, but fantasies aren't reality, sadly. I understand now that some emotional scars never vanish completely, and I accept that. Getting away wasn't just about being far apart. It also meant rewiring my thinking, dismantling the belief that declining requests shows selfishness, that enforcing limits is unkind, and that putting myself first is wrong. This process has been the most challenging I've experienced, and it's a continuous journey. However, for the very first time, I sense I'm living my life my way, no longer the family letdown, no longer playing second fiddle to Brenda, no longer my father's financial source or my mother's go-between. Just being me, complete and okay, without needing anyone else's praise or acceptance. There's a complicated sadness in that, too, grieving the family I always wanted, but never had and never will. That deep, unqualified affection I desperately searched for, but never found where it should have been easily accessible. Yet, there's also incredible liberty in making my own decisions, determining my self-worth, and acknowledging that, even though I didn't pick the family I was born into, I can decide how their impact affects my future. So I choose to stop the patterns, to get better, to flourish, not despite them, but because I finally comprehend I'm worthy of better treatment than what they offered.